What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I'm joined today by Michael Augello and Frank Zawrazky of the Hockey News, coming at you as we do every Tuesday and Thursday to talk about the latest and greatest from around the NHL in bite-sized portions. But before we get into all of that, and there is quite a bit we have to talk about today, do want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right. Well, guys, we got to start with the playoffs. Obviously, Stanley Cup playoffs ongoing. We had another team sent home last night as the Minnesota Wild lost to the Colorado Avalanche in game 5. And just like we all drew it up, right? Brett Kulak scored the overtime winner for Colorado against Minnesota, completed a 3-goal comeback for Colorado. That's going to send them to the Western Conference Final, where they will face either the Vegas Golden Knights or the Anaheim Ducks. Nathan MacKinnon scored the game-tying goal in the third period. There were just under 2 minutes remaining on just really an incredible shot to beat Jesper Wallstedt. Mike, looking at Minnesota now as they're heading home and looking at what Colorado had to do to defeat this team, because we knew this was going to be a tough out, that Minnesota was not going to be an easy out. So what do you think of Colorado's run so far? And this was probably definitely their tougher test of the two opponents they've had so far in Minnesota. So how impressed have you been with their run so far?
2 words: freight train. That's what they are. They're unbelievable. I mean, they were good through the first half of the season with McKinnon and Makar and Nate just having the years that they were having, Landeskog coming back from the injuries that he's had, but adding players like Nazem Kadri and Nick Waugh at the deadline gave them depth up the middle that I don't think any team in the NHL can match. And they're getting goaltending out of Blackwood and Wedgwood, so everything is coming together. And the most impressive thing is Minnesota is a very good team that beat a very good Dallas team, and they didn't go through them like a hot knife through butter, but it was pretty close. 5 games against that team is an incredible accomplishment.
Yeah, I mean, we knew that this was going to be a tough, a gritty, a physical series, and there were thoughts that maybe Minnesota might be able to pull something out here against Colorado. But Frank, when you look at Colorado and their performance throughout these playoffs, what stood out the most to you?
I'll give you 2 words of my own: center depth. Look at what the depth of the Colorado Avalanche has done. I mean, Augello talked about Nick Waugh, but let's look at guys like Jack Drury, Parker Kelly, Brock Nelson, Ross Colton, all of whom have 3 points or more during the playoffs. You don't run through teams, as Augello said, like a hot knife through butter, if you don't have that kind of center depth. We talked about it with Minnesota during their Dallas series about the concerns of depth with both of those squads not having as much center depth, and it bit Minnesota in the rear end with regard to the center depth. We saw it on perfect display. I mean, Kulak isn't one of your top guys, but when he's scoring the series winner in overtime, that tells you all you need to know about the Colorado Avalanche.
Well, and we saw those depth players really, taking center stage, even a guy like Brett Kulak, again, with the game winner in overtime. So really impressive depth that we've seen from Colorado. Of course, Minnesota heading home. They do have a lot to hang their hat on here, though. I think that they got to the second round for the first time in more than 10 years. They had great performances from their star players, guys like Quinn Hughes, Kirill Kaprizov, Matt Boldy, Jesper Wallstedt. They all showed up in these playoffs in a big way. Unfortunately, again, not enough to get through the freight train that is the Colorado Avalanche. But Mike, after watching this Minnesota Wild team compete in these playoffs, do you think how close do you think they really are to a Stanley Cup, like to Stanley Cup contention, despite the early exit that they've had, but looking at just how tough of an out they were, what do you think their biggest missing piece is that's standing between them and Stanley Cup contention?
Well, their biggest hurdle is being in the Central Division and having to face Dallas and Colorado and Utah as an up-and-coming team, and that's really a big hurdle, and that's of course a commentary on Gary Bettman's idiotic divisional playoff system rather than a conference playoff system. Now, in terms of their roster, I mean, the addition of Quinn Hughes was fantastic. But they have a limited window because there's no guarantee that Quinn Hughes is going to sign a long-term contract there. And the injury to Joel Eriksson Ek further weakened them up the middle to the point that Colorado dominated them at center. So they need to get him back for next year, but they'll probably also have to improve and add a center. And there aren't many centers in free agency, so they might have to, maybe trade a young guy like a year off and try to get somebody who is further along in his career and maybe give them a chance to beat a Colorado or a Dallas head-to-head in the playoffs.
Well, especially when you mentioned the addition of Quinn Hughes, and they're going to be looking to try to convince him to stay, convince him that they are really close to a Stanley Cup here. So, Frank, what do you think that Minnesota has to do to make that happen?
Emma, I think in order to better understand the Minnesota Wild, you have to understand a little bit about star power in sports. And it reminds me of the big three of the Miami Heat back in the 2010s. You had a lot of big names on your roster, but ultimately fell short of the end goal, which was getting to the championship. And that's exactly what Minnesota had here. They have guys like Kaprizov, Hartman, Eriksson Ek, Hughes, but they didn't have the depth pieces to sustain them because when Eriksson Ek went down, the team took a nosedive. So I'd like to see them add pieces up the middle. They may have to ship off one of their quote-unquote not big star players, but a moderate star player to get some depth that will allow them to be sustainable in the postseason. Not saying that they should go and trade Kirill Kaprizov, who just signed that massive deal, but someone mid-six I would recommend trading in order to get some more depth down the middle and on the wings to allow them to be more resilient in the playoffs.
It's interesting. You talk about keep coming back to the Quinn Hughes trade, but you got to wonder, if they had a guy like Marco Rossi still on their roster, how much more depth would that have given them? And would this series look any different? So definitely something to keep an eye on there to see what additions or subtractions Minnesota looks to make this offseason. Shifting gears here now outside the playoffs, still plenty of action happening around the NHL, particularly in front offices. So, of course, the big news this morning out of Vancouver is that Henrik and Daniel Sedin have been promoted to co-presidents of hockey operations. Ryan Johnson is going to be the GM of the Vancouver Canucks. So Johnson's been with the Canucks organization since 2013. He most recently was an assistant GM to Patrick Allvin, who was obviously fired last month. Johnson won a Calder Cup with the Abbotsford Canucks during his time as a GM in the 2024-25 season for them. So, Mike, how do you feel about these hirings for the Canucks front office? Do you think that they should have considered external options, or how do you think that they did with these hires?
It reminds me of corporate America. You put out a job search for a bunch of people. You go, oh, this extensive search, and then you end up hiring somebody internally because you had to have that external search. And that's what this. I mean, Ryan Johnson's name was floated out there as recently as last year, and he was the heir apparent. And then everything fell apart, and they had this wide search, and they end up hiring Ryan Johnson, and they bring in the Sedins sort of in the Matt Sundin role as the sort of the PR cover guy. But it sounds like the Sedins will have more power as co-team presidents than Sundin has in Toronto. So, I mean, I don't know what the dynamic there. I mean, I'm sure Adam Foote isn't buying real estate in the Vancouver area and nobody can feel safe right now with the changes that have gone on with the Canucks. And I don't know how good or how bad they are. All I know is essentially Toronto is saying to Vancouver, hold my beer, because Vancouver makes the Leafs look functional rather than dysfunctional.
Well, you also got to wonder, I mean, to any potential external candidates, I mean, how attractive is a front office job in Vancouver right now? I mean, Frank, what do you think about the hires they ended up with? Do you think they should have tried to go with someone external, maybe a combination, with maybe the Sedins and then add an external voice? What do you think is going to happen here in Vancouver?
Well, Emma, I've been very blunt and forthcoming about my support for Kevin Adams and why he, in my opinion, should have been hired as the general manager in Vancouver. I think the Sedins, bringing them in was an excellent move. I don't know if it, like Augello said, if it's more PR or more hockey ops. Time will tell on that. But I think if you want to succeed as the Vancouver Canucks, you need to bring in an external voice, because the old proverb goes, Emma, if you're doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, that's the definition of insanity. And if you're bringing in someone from the previous regime who is still there, and nothing against Ryan Johnson, but he was part of that previous regime which failed miserably. So I think it would have been worthwhile for the Vancouver Canucks to bring in a guy like Kevin Adams, especially when you have a lot of good draft picks, a lot of young prospects. Again, I've been very candid about my support and why I think he built the Buffalo Sabres on a number of occasions, but that's neither here nor there. I think they should have gone external rather than hiring internal, unless that general manager is somebody who can see into the future. I would have gone external.
Well, Vancouver, not the only team making some personnel changes this week. We've also got over in Edmonton, they announced that they have parted ways with their head coach, Kris Knoblauch. So Knoblauch took over as head coach of the Oilers in November of 2023. He replaced Jay Woodcroft. That ended up being a remarkable season for them, remarkable turnaround. He led Edmonton to the Stanley Cup final that year and the next. And of course, as we know, lost to the Florida Panthers both times. And this year, Edmonton had fallen on some injury issues. There were some roster issues that they failed to address in time for the playoffs, and obviously they were bounced in the first round by Anaheim. So not a total surprise to see Knoblauch fired, though he will be owed the rest of his contract, which I believe is 3 years. So, Mike, what do you think just overall looking at his tenure with the Oilers? And do you think that he will draw interest from other teams around the league?
Well, if you remember the old Tom Hanks movie, Joe versus the Volcano, he was going to jump into the volcano as a sacrifice. Kris Knoblauch is Joe. That's what's going on here. I mean, I don't think he should have been fired, because the incompetence in this organization is one step above him and Stan Bowman. They made horrible roster moves that did not address the needs of the team. Going back to last year's deadline, it was exacerbated during this offseason and then throughout the regular season. So, I mean, Kris Knoblauch didn't deserve it. And I do think he could be in the mix for other jobs. I mean, if LA doesn't get permission to talk to Bruce Cassidy, or Toronto, I'm sure they're going to have a wide search. And who is Kris Knoblauch the junior coach for, and who might the Maple Leafs be interested in 2 years? Oh, I don't know. I have no idea.
Yeah, who's to say? Frank, what do you think of this decision? And do you think that Knoblauch does draw interest for another head coaching job?
Emma, anytime you take a team from being out of the playoffs to 2 consecutive Stanley Cup finals, that's going to draw interest. And when you look at Knoblauch, I really agree with Augello. In my opinion, the Oilers just fired someone to fire someone. They didn't have a reason behind doing it. Augello hit the nail on the head. Stan Bowman emptied the pantry on draft picks and future assets to get some of the players from Chicago, like a Connor Murphy. I mean, this is not on Kris Knoblauch. The fact that he did what he was able to do with the pieces he had should make him more attractive to teams, not less attractive. I think he'll be talked to by a number of teams. And I think Knoblauch was kind of given a raw deal in Edmonton. He did what the team asked him to do. He helped take them to 2 consecutive Stanley Cup finals. Yes, he didn't win, but that was because of lack of depth. And who's responsible for hiring, trading, drafting? It's the general manager. It's not Knoblauch. Knoblauch shouldn't have been the one to go. It should have been Stan Bowman.
Yep, it's the definitely what we've seen and what we've talked about all year with the Oilers, that they've had a lot of holes on that roster and did not fill them in time for the playoffs or show any kind of urgency to fill them. So will be interesting to see what happens there. Mike, you mentioned Toronto, and there's been some chatter there too. Of course, now that we know that they fired Craig Berube, Elliot Friedman reported this week that the Maple Leafs could have interest in Manny Malhotra to fill their coaching vacancy. So Malhotra was with the Leafs for 4 seasons from 2020 to 2024. He left to become head coach of Abbotsford, guided them to the Calder Cup in his first season there. So Malhotra now has not been a head coach at the NHL level, but Mike, do you think his familiarity with the organization could make him a stronger candidate for the position?
I think the familiarity he has with the players still on that team would be a great help. I believe he coached the power play for a time with the Leafs, and that's the group that includes Nylander, Matthews, and Morgan Rielly and Tavares, who are the core group of the team. So I think he'd be a good fit. Obviously, he's won a Calder Cup. The question here is, with all the changes that are going on in Vancouver, whether Vancouver is going to fire Adam Foote. And if they do fire Adam Foote, then his GM in Abbotsford might want to hire Malhotra. Now, I question whether, if that's their designs, whether they'll even give him permission to talk to other teams in the league. If they do, I think the Leafs could snag him. They're going to have a wide search, according to John Chaika. It could include guys like Bruce Cassidy, but I don't think Bruce Cassidy is a fit with the Leafs. I think they need a new age coach, somebody who is more data driven and analytic aligned, like John Chaika. And that doesn't smack to me as Peter Laviolette or Bruce Cassidy. That's more along the lines of David Carl from Denver or Manny Malhotra.
Yeah, well, and we know, you bring up a good point about Adam Foote. His biggest job security was Quinn Hughes. Quinn Hughes really liked Adam Foote. We know Quinn Hughes isn't there anymore, so could be something to monitor there in Vancouver. But Frank, what do you think about a potential fit for Malhotra in Toronto? And do you think that his lack of NHL head coaching experience would work against him here?
I don't, Emma. And in fact, I think someone is actually helping elevate his stock. And that would be his son, Caleb. So Caleb Malhotra, if you guys aren't familiar, is one of the top prospects for the 2026 NHL draft. And he is lit it up in the OHL, was a Rookie of the Year finalist, projected to potentially go top 10. I had him in my top 10. And the reason I'm bringing him up is, if he can develop his own son like that, imagine what he can do with already established NHL players and helping them reach their full potential. So I absolutely think there's going to be interest. It wouldn't shock me if the Maple Leafs hire him, but the track record he's had helping win that Calder Cup, developing what is a bona fide potential top 10 NHL draft pick in his son, Caleb. I mean, this is a guy that knows how to coach. And if you're seeing it at a interfamilial level with his son, I don't see why he can't do it with a guy like Austin Matthews or John Tavares, who, like you guys have said, he has some familiarity with. So players that know him and are familiar with him could easily buy into his systems, which is exactly what the Maple Leafs would want for a quick turnaround. I see this as a potential fit, but only Chaika and company will know what's coming.
Yeah, these lots of front office and coaching openings still around the league. Teams looking to get those shored up, obviously, ideally before the draft, and even the teams who are still in the playoffs right now, still having to kind of have one eye on the present, one eye on the future, because that offseason, it's coming quick. So if you look at Vegas, for example, Pavel Dorofeyev, he's been one of the most impressive players in these playoffs. He's due for a big raise this summer. He's in the final season of his 2-year deal. He's making less than $2 million a year, $1.85 million on his cap hit. He finished the regular season with 37 goals, 64 points in 82 games. He's kept his scoring touch going into the Stanley Cup playoffs. He's now up to 7 goals in 11 games. He scored 2 goals in game 5 against Anaheim, including the overtime winner, to give Vegas the 3-2 series lead and push Anaheim to the brink of elimination. So, Mike, if you're Vegas, I mean, what do you think this next contract is going to look like? Because we know Vegas is tight on cap space. That's kind of been tale as old as time there. So they also are going to want to extend Rasmus Andersson. So when you look at just kind of the whole situation in Vegas, do you think there's a chance that either of those guys, Andersson or Dorofeyev, end up testing free agency, or do you think they find a way to bring them both back?
Well, Dorofeyev is an RFA with arb rights, and that I don't think they want to go to arbitration, because after hitting the 30 goal mark 2 years in a row, he's probably going to get an award of something like $7 million. So they're probably going to want, and it'll be impossible sort of for them to plan if he does get an award like that. So they'll want to lock him in on an amount. But to your point, Emma, I mean, Mark Stone is got 1 more year left in his contract. He just got injured in the playoffs. Alex Pietrangelo, who will probably never play again, he counts on the cap until they put him on season-ending long-term injury. They only have about $6 million in cap space right now, and they have other free agents. So it's going to be a tight squeeze. They're going to have to make a decision on which one of these two they're going to sign. And if I would guess, it's probably going to be Andersson, because they're on defense. They're just not as deep as they are up front. And they will try to get Dorofeyev on a 1-year deal, something that's reasonable. But if I'm him, I want to get paid after 2 years in a row like he's played. I want to get paid. So they may have to make a difficult decision, like maybe trading William Karlsson and clearing up $5.5 million in cap space. They're going to have to make some tough decisions, but they always make tough decisions.
They do, and it always seems to work out. They always seem to make it work. But Frank, how do you see this playing out with both of these players, due for new contracts? As Mike mentioned, with Dorofeyev being an RFA, there's a little bit different situation, but still, it's a player that you want to try to avoid arbitration with if you can.
Yeah, and I think I want to look back to a little bit of history with Vegas and kind of see how it may turn and the tables may turn, so to speak. Vegas this past off season, I should say, was able to acquire the rights for Mitch Marner from Toronto for a reasonable asset. And in my opinion, if Vegas isn't able to sign Pavel Dorofeyev, because I agree with Augello, their defense isn't what it was. They need to prioritize Rasmus Andersson. It wouldn't shock me if Vegas trades the rights to Pavel Dorofeyev to a contender team, maybe like a San Jose, maybe like a Chicago, who knows? But that would be, if you can't sign Dorofeyev on that 1-year team-friendly deal, I wouldn't see a problem in trying to trade his rights for someone who's already under contract, so that Vegas can get something out of it rather than going to arbitration and being awarded something like $7 million, because that number sounds about right. It makes sense to maybe trade him if you're not going to re-sign him, try and get something for him, because he's been an absolute nail gun this playoffs, blocking shots, especially, TJ Oshie on ESPN did a really good demonstration of where he got hit with the puck, was on the side of the knee with no padding, returns to the game and scores the overtime winner. That's the kind of thing that really can't be taught. It's a character thing. So a lot of teams will be chomping at the bit to get him, should he not re-sign in Vegas.
Yeah, huge and still somehow somewhat underrated asset in Vegas in Dorofeyev. Another guy who's going to be looking for a new contract this summer over in Buffalo, Mike, is Zach Benson with the Sabres. So he's been another standout performer in these playoffs. He's tied for the team lead in goals in the playoffs. He's tied for 3rd on the team in total scoring. He's also put up career highs in goals, assists, points during the regular season too. So, Mike, in your opinion, what do you think this next contract looks like for Zach Benson?
If you based his salary on annoyance level, he should be paid more than Rasmus Dahlin. Well, I think the Benson contract ties into Alex Tuch's contract situation, because they have plenty of cap space, but there clearly, in my mind, there is a structure there that nobody is going to make more than Rasmus Dahlin at $11 million. And I don't think that they want to pay Alex Tuch 10.8 million, which would be around what Adrian Kempe made. And that's what he's been looking for. I'm sure the Sabres are going to try to want to get Zach Benson on the same deal that they got Josh Doan on, which was a little over $7 million. But with the cap going up to $104 million, I think they're whistling past the graveyard. I think that Zach Benson's going to want to get paid. He's improved every year. He's been a playoff performer. I think he's probably a 50, 60, 65 point guy, and he's going to expect to be paid accordingly. So they're not going to get off cheap. I don't think they're going to be able to pay him on a bridge deal. I think that they're going to want to get him on as long as a term as possible. And if they do that, they're going to have to pay him. But I think it also factors into what happens with Alex Tuch.
Frank, what do you think Benson's next contract looks like?
I'm thinking potentially an 8x7, 8 years, 8 million, 7 years. Just with the way that he's played the game and the way he's come into the league. I mean, Johnny Lazarus of the Daily Faceoff had a tweet the other day. It said, quote, "The NHL isn't a development league unless you're Zach Benson." And if you look at what Zach Benson has done, came straight from the WHL in 22-23 with the former Winnipeg Ice. Now he put up 30 points in his rookie year, and now he's up to 43 points. He has not played a single game in the American Hockey League. Not one. How many players do you know of that are making an impact straight out of junior hockey that have not played in the American Hockey League? I really can't think of many that are playing in the NHL. So he kind of controls his own destiny at this point, guys. He's, a pest for other teams, but he can also put the puck in the back of the net. I see a lot of shades of kind of Brad Marchand in the way he plays the game, likes to get under his opponent's skin. A young Marchand who can put the puck in the back of the net. Buffalo just basically should kind of give him whatever he wants because he is one of the pieces of that franchise going forward that should be there a long time.
Well, and he's going to be with Buffalo here this postseason, still trying to make this playoff push and make it to the next round. Of course, for all the teams that are out of the playoffs right now, a lot of those players now going over to play in the World Championships, which are getting underway this week. One storyline to watch there is going to be the return of one Alexander Barkov. So he missed the entire regular season with the Florida Panthers, as we know, due to a torn ACL, which he suffered in August. So, Mike, looking at Barkov, coming back in time to compete for Finland in the World Championships this year, how do you think he's going to look when he returns for the Panthers? I mean, do you think he'll be back to peak form? It's a really tough injury to recover from. So what do you think the expectation should be for him?
Usually a player who has an ACL injury takes about 1.5 to 2 years to get back to the form that they were. And he's young enough that I think that is an accurate indicator. Now he'll still start the regular season barring re-injury, and we hope that doesn't happen. But they don't need him to be prime Alexander Barkov right at the very beginning of the season. They need him to be that at the end of the year when they make the playoffs. And with all the injuries that they've had, if they get Barkov back, if they get Tkachuk back, if they re-sign Bobrovsky, they're top 3 in the Atlantic Division. I mean, there are teams like Florida and Toronto that will bounce back, and it'll make the Atlantic much more difficult than it was this year. And you could see teams like Tampa and Boston take a step back. But Florida, if they get 80% of Barkov at the beginning of the year, to go along with Anton Lundell and the players that they have right now, they'll be fine.
Yeah, 80% of Barkov is better than 100% of a lot of other guys. So I'm sure they will take that, as you said. Frank, when you look at Barkov and the injury that he's suffered and just the injuries in general, I mean, the Florida Panthers going to the Stanley Cup, I mean, we saw it with Edmonton too. They were depleted by injuries as well. There's a lot of wear and tear when you go to the Stanley Cup final 2 years in a row. So how do you think, fans or people should expect to see Barkov performing and contributing for Florida when he does come back?
I think he'll be 100% by Halloween. And the reason I say that is Alexander Barkov is a very cerebral hockey player. He sees the game at such a high level, guys. And he wouldn't be going to the Worlds if he didn't think he was ready. in my opinion, nothing against the Worlds, this may be like a mini training camp for Barkov to kind of see where he's at. We may not see him playing top minutes, but he's going to get a lot of action. And this action will allow us to better see, and allow him, for that matter, to better see where he's at. I think he'll be 100% by Halloween, just because of, the way he sees the game. He's not going to push himself where he thinks there's going to be risk of an injury. He's on he's on a good standing with head coach Paul Maurice. Maurice understood where he was at. That's why they shut down Marchand towards the end of the season. So they're loading up, and I think some weight could be alleviated, quite honestly, from the Florida Panthers, because remember, they have a top 10 NHL draft pick. And who could they take with that pick? Well, I've got a number of ideas, but one of those that could be around there is a guy I referenced earlier, and that being Caleb Malhotra. Wouldn't it be nice if you integrate Caleb Malhotra for a few games, maybe send him back to junior hockey and allow Alexander Barkov to transition in without burning a year of his contract? That's what I would be looking at if I'm the Florida Panthers. See how he does at the Worlds, but he could scare a lot of teams by being ready around Halloween.
Yeah, definitely a storyline to keep an eye on during the Worlds this year. Like I said, getting underway this week. Want to wrap up today talking about the CHL. The CHL, they finished announcing their list of the top 50 players of the last 50 years to play in their league. Probably to the surprise of no one, Mario Lemieux topping the list there at number 1. So the top 5 in total are Lemieux, number 2, Sidney Crosby, number 3, Wayne Gretzky, number 4, Connor McDavid, and number 5, Mike Bossy. So few guys may have heard of him. I don't know. But I mean, Mike, when you look at this list, how impressive is it that both Crosby and McDavid are the only active NHLers in the top 5, considering they played in the CHL 20 to 30 years after some of the other guys on this list?
I mean, it's impressive in the fact that the CHL is a much tougher league going forward than it was back then. But I look at the individual achievements of somebody like Mario Lemieux, who as an 18-year-old won a Memorial Cup and scored 282 points and 133 goals. Now that, I don't care how weak the queue is, that's impressive. But, Wayne Gretzky had 1 year in the Ontario Hockey League with Sault Ste. Marie. And he, as a 16-year-old, scored 182 points. I mean, I just don't know how. And then he went to the WHA as a 17-year-old. So I don't know how they could have ranked. I understand they ranked Lemieux higher because he had almost 100 points more, but he did it as an 18-year-old, and we know the physicality that Mario Lemieux, the advantage he had as a big player. The fact that Gretzky did it as a 16-year-old, and Gretzky was not a big, heavy player. He was just incredibly skilled. I think Gretzky should have been number 1 and not Lemieux.
Interesting. Frank, what do you think?
Starting out, there was a commercial that the NHL ran last year about the next golden era of hockey is now. And I think we saw that gold mined in the CHL. And what I mean by that is, you look at Crosby and McDavid both being on this list, a number of years apart, but they're both in their impressive performance. I wouldn't say they're prime for both of them, but I would say they're both world-class players at the same time. They both come from the CHL. The CHL is the gold mine for these players. And it's very impressive that we're seeing such longevity out of these CHL players. A lot of players from other junior leagues, they may have a few good years at the NHL level, but then bump down. The CHL is by far the best junior league in the world. And when you look at it through player development to the NHL, to professional hockey overseas, they're pumping things out like the Industrial Revolution, for that matter. And it's a gold mine for players. So I'm really impressed with seeing both McDavid and Crosby out at the same time. I do have one bone to pick with the list, and that's that Patrick Kane was not in the top 10. That is my only bone to pick. I think he's a top 10 CHL player of all time. Look at the season he had with the London Knights after rounding out his game with the national team development program. I was very surprised he was not in the top 5, let alone the top 10.
Definitely plenty of room for debate here with this list. Lots of impressive performances in the CHL. So let us know what you think about the list. If you want to read any more about it, head over to the Hockey News. It's been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start is a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free. Grab your subscription today. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you so much for tuning in, listening to us, talking some hockey. We really do appreciate it. We will be back with an all new episode next week. But for now, for Michael Augello and Frank Zawrazky, I'm Emma Lingan. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next time.